All right, everybody. So I thought, you know what? It's jury deliberation time. Let's continue the discussion from earlier while we await the jury's verdict and talk about what we saw in the defense's closing argument, what we saw then in the follow up. So obviously, I can see from the poll so far, we've got a rather mixed group here out of the 10 votes. We've got 40% saying guilty, 40% guilty of a lesser, hung jury 20%, and nobody saying not guilty. Now, I want everybody to remember that we are privy to details that jury is not. So there's a lot of bias out here. This is one of those cases where us viewing this outside the courtroom, outside of the measures being taken, totally changes how we interpret the evidence, because our perspective is going to be very much colored by the fact that we know what happened in Missouri. We know this guy did something to his father. But this jury is going to be dealing with knowing that there was another incident. He's never been charged. They're not going to know it was his dad unless they already knew this going in, although these jurors were intensely questioned and vetted. And judging from the defense and the approach they've taken, we have people who are would be very open to self-defense. They're open to the idea of defending themselves. And I think that this could be a surprising verdict for many, because I want you to kind of, if we were looking at this without the knowledge of what happened in Missouri, what happened between him and his father, what are we looking at here? Now, we know there were some statements made, right? We know that allegedly unrecorded statements made to the grandfather, but there's a problem with those. And what is the problem? Well, the problem is he didn't report them to anybody in terms of authorities or police until after she passed away. Now, we know she alluded to these, right? But we know she also made a 2.5-hour drive, even in light of whatever it was her father told her that he said. Now, the father says now what he said, but we don't know because the mom never gets into specifics, nor is there a recording of what it was that this guy allegedly said, that Griffith allegedly said to his grandfather. But here's what we do know. We know that this jury is sitting on a set of facts that this mom was definitely mentally disturbed herself. She had problems. And as I said, the defense jumped right on what I said they would. And that is the fact that she had attacked someone else with a knife. So the question is, when they go into a highly charged, highly volatile situation, and they end up in that house together, is it really reasonable to think that beyond a reasonable doubt that this young man becomes the sole aggressor in this situation? Remember, this woman pursued him. He left. If we were looking at this case in any other light, without any of the back knowledge, we would be saying this young man has been retreating and retreating and retreating. Remember, he was at that house a few days prior. They get into it. What does he do? He leaves and he goes to his grandmother. What does he do in prior incidences? Please get me out of this situation. Now, when he's asked, they say, what would you do if you went back in? He says, eventually I'm going to have to defend myself. He's telling everyone. We're hearing it on the Ring cameras. Now, what we know is that this lady has tried every bit of manipulation that she could to get her son back. And she drives 2.5 hours and goes and confronts him. We know from the neighbors that there's a confrontation going on. She isn't coming in with candy and his favorite junk food and saying, son, come back home and let me make you dinner. She's telling him, get your butt home. And like we already know, she has a history of confrontational, volatile, and violent issues when she's not getting her way. She ran over her ex's girlfriend's or a member of her ex-boyfriend's family. She stabbed the dad that ended up dying in a domestic dispute of the past. We know that she was involved in domestic occurrences. We know that there were allegations that she hit. We know that police came home and saw that she was doing some extremely disturbing punishments for this young man with weights above his head and all these things that were not normal ways that you would handle things. And that this young man was being provoked and pushed to his own extent. Now, does that say that he should have hit his mother or done anything like that? Absolutely not. But he did try. He tried to retreat, and she comes to him. Now, that's where the craziness of this prosecutor is, where he tries to paint this picture that she's got this perfect home with all the amenities and all the things he loves, and all she wants is her son home. Well, we heard the ring camera. We heard the cussing and the berating. And there is, as we talked about on Saturday when I was when I was doing the On the Record podcast with Jody Bolt, and we showed the article, which was referencing the study of the damage that verbal abuse can have on the psyche of young children, and especially when then you couple it with actual physical abuse. And this woman who we already know
jury and is present. Good morning. If we can have Ms. Bluell back on the stand, please.
Hold on one moment here. We already know that this woman is someone who's capable of having violent confrontations, who we know is emotionally unstable. So with that background, and that knowledge, it's not clear cut as the prosecutor would have you believe. It's not this clear cut thing that says, hey, she's just going there out of the goodness of her heart. So where do I think the jury finds in this case without the knowledge? I don't think there's any way they're getting to, in my opinion, the top end of this. I would be very, very surprised if they come in with that. I think they are going to find some form of a lesser charge. I think it's actually going to be manslaughter, because I think what they're going to think is that he went too far. I think they're going to find manslaughter. That there's this confrontation. Nobody knows who picked the knife up first, but it's very hard for me to believe that a jury could get to premeditated or a premeditated act in this case when this lady pursues him. And with the history, now I understand there's the alleged conversation from the grandfather, but if you don't believe him, if there's a question of credibility there, and then you have the other evidence that comes in that shows that this lady had a propensity and had a history of attacking people with knives, and a knife is used, I find it hard to believe that you're going to get to a point where you're going to say, okay, this young man who had did everything up until that moment to try to get away from this woman, and she pursues him, backs him into the corner, takes him into the house. Now, getting to self-defense, I don't know, but it is possible. I could see this jury coming back on self-defense, because if she's attacking him and they think that, and again, I don't know, we weren't seeing the pictures, but if there's any potential way that she's coming at him with the knife and he's going backwards like this, and the positioning of that cut, it's very possible that if they were wrestling around, and remember, he had defensive injuries, he had cuts on his hands. So meaning there's a possibility that she was coming at him and he was defending himself. And in that process, she gets cut on her neck and bleeds out. Obviously, the statements he makes to the grandfather are disturbing. I think that would be a very good outcome because of what we already know to be the case about his history. That if he gets manslaughter, which is punishable by up to 30 years in Florida, that the judge would then be able to dispense a sentence and potentially even ask for him to receive some sort of mental health counseling and supervision when he gets out. Because I think the biggest fear for everyone in this case, if you've been watching it, is that it just seems like if this young man is acquitted and allowed to walk out of that courthouse, it's not a matter of will he, it's a matter of when, it's a matter of if. He will do this again, I think. And that's very scary because, and it may be the grandmother, or it could be a future spouse. But clearly, this young man has shown twice now that he's capable of doing this. And the other thing is he can't just walk away without getting, obviously, without getting some form of mental health. Now, the problem is with a straight not guilty, there's no requirement that he gets any mental health help because they're not asking for a not guilty by reason of insanity. They're not raising a mental health defense. So it's very, very scary for the residents of where this young man might live. The thought that he'll be walking around having already killed 2 people. Now, again, I have a strong suspicion that if he were to be acquitted, that the authorities in Missouri may move on him. I don't know. But I just feel like maybe there's some things that were found. Maybe there are some tapes. I don't know. Maybe there's some statements that have since been given that the Missouri authorities would say, you know what, rather than let this kid walk around, we're go ahead and arrest him and take him to Missouri and put him on trial over there and see if we can get a conviction over there. And it's just another opportunity for them to try to keep the community safe from a young man who's very troubled, who's had very troubling relationships with his parents, who's definitely not been in loving relationships. Sorry about that, guys. I'm actually starting another stream while I'm doing this, so that's why there's the background. But who's not been in loving relationships and it is extremely dangerous. I mean, extremely dangerous. So I don't know. I think this is going to be one of those situations, kind of like when I served on the jury, where you get out and you find out about the person that you served on, but you have to understand that they're not here to talk about the dad, and that really can't come in if the judge decides it's not relevant, and that would create bias. On the jury that I served on, the defendant that I was involved in had been previously convicted of crimes against young kids that I didn't even know about. But when I looked up the defendant and was doing research, like I'm sure many jurors do, I realized, holy cow, this guy had a history of this stuff. Now, but the crime he was charged with had nothing to do with that. So it would have been extremely inappropriate had I gone home and done research and not followed what the court would have told me to do, and then found out about that. Could that have colored my opinion of this man? Could that have colored my verdict? Could that have colored what I would have said if I would have thought to myself, you know what? This guy could be a danger to the community in other ways, and we have an opportunity here. And in that case, it was a self-defense case with 2 relatives. Could that have colored my opinion of his actions and who he was? Of course. Would I have let that happen? I don't think I would have. But when I came out, I thought, oh my gosh. And for a minute, I thought to myself, did I make the right decision? But I know I did, because I judged that case when I was deciding as a juror on the facts and the merits and the evidence that was presented to me at that time. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see if what this jury comes up with, because I think it's going to be very, 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 very interesting. So with that said, guys, I just want to come in, finish up my thoughts from earlier, give some reflections on what I thought of the state's closing and the defense's closing, followed up by the state's closing. The state, I'm disappointed in the way the prosecutors, and I'm disappointed in general with ASAP Rocky prosecutors. I'm so disappointed in them, because they're doing what, and so is this guy. They're so caught up in the wrong thing. They're not here to win. They're here to look at the evidence and figure out the best outcome. And that this prosecutor could sit here and look and say that this is premeditated, this is some premeditated act, like he planned it out, I think is really disingenuous. This prosecutor would have been better off charging this case the way it needed to be charged. And in my opinion, that would have been some form of no worse than second degree. Because this is something that developed in the moment. There's a strong likelihood that this woman picked up the knife and maybe introduced the knife. And maybe at that point he lost control. But to go the route of kidnapping and holding against her will, and I understand his theory is that she was in there for an hour. I don't think that they were in there. I don't think she was dead for the entire hour. I think that they were in there for the hour. I think there was it got highly charged, and there definitely was obviously an altercation, but it obviously wasn't some situation where he's dragging her all around and there's this great resistance, because the trailer itself was in pretty good condition. It wasn't signs of a major struggle. So that's problematic for the way we're looking at this. But I think what's clear to me is that there's no way to rule out here that this woman didn't pick the knife up and come at him. He had defensive wounds. So I think, to me, this would have been a better way, is to offer this young man manslaughter, right? Manslaughter, with the ability for him to get some mental health help and hopefully deal with the demons that are inside of him. But at the same point, acknowledge that this mother was not a saint. And by acknowledging that, also acknowledging the failings of the people around this child who ignored his pleas to go into foster home. The prosecutor, by putting this all on the mom and making her seem like she is this terrible individual, that she is this saint-like individual who created a perfect home, and that he's this premeditated kid, or he's this premeditated unaliver who's just evil and decides out of a place of evilness to unalive her, takes away from the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is that this situation was on a collision course. You had a mother who was unstable, who was unfit, that they failed to take this child out of her care. You had a kid who's already done this once, and they're leaving him in a volatile situation. And it was basically just who was going to kill each other first. And the likely outcome was what exactly occurred. She was going to do something that was going to provoke, because we know she's done it before. She's pulled knives. She's ran people over with cars. She's tried to kill herself. And she was going to eventually do something that was going to cause him to do something that was going to put the situation in where it's at right now. So the state, in my opinion, is doing a disservice to allowing this situation to not happen again, to allowing the proper reflection and the proper analysis of where these entities went wrong and where they could have prevented this from happening. And that's where a complete conviction for the top charge robs us of that. Now, if the jury comes back, and I believe finds what they should do, which is finding some form of a lesser, which acknowledges the fact that the mom came into this situation and was caused a part of it. Now, she didn't deserve to die, but she caused her coming to the house was not what should have happened. She should have followed the advice of that detective Rabioni. She should have stayed away, and she should have let things cool down, but she wasn't going to do that. And all of these people that were involved in this case, like they have been, they're to blame, and they should be held accountable to some level as well. Not necessarily criminally, but they should be looked at as saying, what could you have done different? How could you have acted differently? And how should this have gone different? And it should be, and those discussions don't happen if they're allowed to claim that this was a result of an evil kid who just had evil intentions, who just wanted to come in and kill his mother. And it's not that simple. I don't believe it's that simple. But I do believe it's a very scary thought of just unleashing him back on society in a few hours if this jury comes back with a full not guilty. That's a very, very scary situation. I believe we'll be covering another case of his in the very, very, very near future. But anyways, with that said, guys, we're going to await the jury's verdict. And of course, as always, we'll be here waiting for it, and we'll deliver it to you. And of course, I will absolutely give you my thoughts with what the jury comes back with. We've got the closing arguments. If you missed some of the closing arguments, they're going to be released in their own individual videos over the next couple of hours. So is the judge's instructions. I'd encourage all of you to watch closely the judge's instructions. There's going to be, once the premieres are done, key timestamps will be present in those videos for you to go to the important parts. Even if you've already seen them and you want to see what the important parts are, jump in and check them out. It's going to be important for you to understand what this jury comes back with as you're deliberating on this as well. And of course, take another listen. Listen to what the defense says. Listen to what the state says. Go back. The full playlist of all the testimony in the case is complete with timestamps to the key parts of those testimonies. So if you want to go back and review, I would encourage you to go back and review Detective Rabioni's testimony. If I'm saying that right, I don't know if I am, because she holds, I think, what will be very compelling evidence that these jurors might rely on. Review that grandfather's testimony. Let me know whether you think he's credible or not. Would you believe him? Do you believe him? Do you think he's credible in what he said? Or do you think he's making stuff up to insert himself in this case? Or do you think he's maybe exaggerating a little bit, which is where I think he's at? And he may have said something like that. Like, I think he said something to the degree of, like, at some point I'm going to kill my mom. Like, if I'm going to kill her if she does this, or if she comes at me with a knife. Remember, the whole family's aware of what she does. So some of these statements could have been said in a different context, but then when she dies, everything's taken much different. But anyways, check it out. Let me know. And we're going to throw it back here to the courtroom for deliberations, and we'll see what happens.